David here. Today we're diving into a haunting case. One that starts in pain, isolation, and deception, and ends in something even darker. Orphanages aren't sanctuaries. They're institutions where personal space doesn't exist and the weak are often preyed upon. For Amanda and Annemarie MCCLURE, life behind those walls meant survival, not childhood. But the sisters had something most others didn't: each other. That bond gave them strength. It kept them safe from the older kids who dominated through intimidation and violence. As long as they stayed to themselves and didn't attract attention, they could get through the day without a bruise or a breakdown. They had one hope: an escape. Their mother, they believed, would soon learn that their father, Larry MCCLURE, had been sent to prison. That news had made its rounds across local media, headlining broadcasts and front pages alike. Surely, it was only a matter of time before she came to take them home. But weeks turned into months, and months into the grim realization that no one was coming. That hope began to rot into resentment. Then came Meredith. She was a new face, timid and broken, with eyes that darted at every noise. Her story was tragic. Her mother, lost to drugs, had overdosed, and Meredith, paralyzed by fear, lived with the corpse for days. She didn't dare call for help, terrified of what would happen. Help only came when one of her mother's friends stumbled upon the scene and anonymously alerted authorities. That trauma followed Meredith into the orphanage. Amanda and Annemarie found in her a kindred spirit, someone just as damaged by betrayal and neglect. They shielded her from the same bullies they had long avoided. Soon they became a trio, stronger, safer. In their tight-knit circle, Meredith finally asked why the sisters had landed in the system. Annemarie, without missing a beat, conjured a story. A father, a brave police officer, gunned down in the line of duty. Amanda sat frozen, her eyes betraying the lie, but one glance from her sister told her to stay silent. Meredith, moved by the false heroism, spread the story like wildfire. The MCCLURE sisters became instant legends. In a place full of tragedy and shame, their story sounded noble, even glamorous. The other kids, many of them born from addiction, incarceration, or abandonment, began to admire them. The days of solitude and silence ended. The sisters had become celebrities within the walls of their desolate refuge. But that illusion was fragile. Eventually, someone discovered the truth. Their father wasn't a fallen hero, he was a convicted felon, serving time for sexually assaulting a minor. The revelation shattered their image, and the fallout was swift and brutal. Isolation returned, only this time, it came with whispers, stares, and hostility. They had fallen harder than they ever climbed. Luck finally intervened. Separate families, unaware of the storm behind the girls' histories, decided to adopt them. For the first time in years, a door opened to something better. Freedom, safety, and maybe even love. But that second chance came at a cost. The sisters were adopted by different families. Contact faded. The bond that had once been their lifeline was quietly severed. Amanda and Annemarie might have faded into obscurity, just two troubled girls left in the wake of a criminal father's legacy. But that's not where their story ends. Instead, it leads into one of the most shocking cases the state of Virginia has ever seen. Amanda eventually found someone. At 29, she met John McGuire, a 38-year-old father of two. Her adoptive parents had worried she'd remain alone, emotionally paralyzed by the betrayal of her biological mother and the shadow of her father. So when she told them she was seeing someone, they were relieved, maybe even hopeful. Amanda's quiet years seemed to finally be paying off. John was kind, grounded, and even kept cordial ties with his ex-wife. By all accounts, a good man. Annemarie, on the other hand, never quite found stability. Her personal life remained a mystery. While Amanda seemed to be settling into a promising future, her sister stayed adrift, lost in the wake of their divided past. Then Larry MCCLURE was released. Time had done little to soften him. He still resided in Virginia, this time in a battered mobile home. And almost immediately, he began searching for his daughters. His first stop, the home of Amanda's adoptive parents, Glenn and Alex. He showed up without warning. Deep lines in his face, dark circles under his eyes, and a demeanor that screamed instability. He wasn't drunk, but something about his presence was off. His words slurred with desperation and an eerie calm. He introduced himself, said he wanted to reconnect with Amanda, and asked for her address and phone number. Glenn refused. The man standing on his porch wasn't someone you let into your daughter's life. But Glenn, trying to be civil, promised to pass along the message that Amanda's biological father was looking for her. Though Amanda and Anna Marie had been separated by adoption, trauma has a way of binding souls in ways distance can't erase. Their silence didn't mean they forgot each other. It meant they were still surviving. And for Amanda, survival had taken the shape of a life with John, a man she believed would be her future. She had fought through a childhood most couldn't imagine and was finally building something that resembled stability. But in the shadows, her past was stirring again, this time in the form of a man who had already destroyed her once. Larry's reappearance wasn't a simple family reunion. It was a warning sign. His release wasn't just a date on a calendar. It was the start of something dark unfolding. Glenn's instincts were right. Larry hadn't changed. Whatever sobriety he presented was only skin deep. Beneath that was a predator, calculated, dangerous, and looking to reclaim control. No one could have predicted what came next. No one could have imagined how this already devastating story would spiral into something even more grotesque. The MCCLURE family was fractured by violence, lies, and betrayal. But the worst was still to come. And when it came, it would stain everything in its path. Glenn was deeply unsettled when he heard the words biological father, but he masked his discomfort, thanked the man, and watched him leave. True to his promise, he sat down with Amanda and told her what had happened. That her father had shown up at their door, free from prison and looking to reconnect. The news struck Amanda like a hammer to the chest. Her mind erupted into chaos. Part of her, a voice sharpened by years of trauma, screamed to cut all ties. But another voice, gentler, nostalgic, told her to give him a chance, to see if there was anything left to salvage. Against her better judgment, Amanda listened to that second voice. She called him. The conversation was unsettling in its simplicity. Larry sounded calm, even cheerful. He told her how glad he was to hear her voice, asked about her life, and when Amanda explained she was married and doing well, he seemed genuinely pleased. Then came the hook. He invited her and her husband over for dinner. Amanda hesitated. She didn't know if seeing her father was a good idea, but Larry knew exactly where to press. "Come on," he said. "Let's forget the past. I've lived every day dreaming of seeing you and Anna Marie again." He claimed to have already seen her sister, said they'd gone on a nature trip together, spent time like a real father and daughter. Amanda's guard dropped. She ached to see Anna Marie, after almost 2 decades apart. That was all it took. But it was a lie. There's no record of that nature trip, no visit between Larry and Anna Marie. At the time, she was living in North Carolina, nearly 200 miles away, and Larry hadn't spoken to her at all. Yet the illusion worked. Amanda met with her father, and it was the beginning of something horrifying. Slowly, he began introducing both her and her husband, John, to illegal drugs, substances he brewed himself in a squalid camper. Their lives began to unravel. Once financially stable, Amanda and John soon found themselves drained. Larry demanded money that was used to continue cooking the very poisons that were eating them alive. As their dependency grew, jobs were lost, bills piled up, their house was gone. Desperate, John filed as an addict to receive state aid, a mere $180, barely enough to keep their addiction afloat. It was around then that Larry reintroduced Anna Marie into the picture, this time for real. And like Amanda, she was ensnared, addicted, exploited, and manipulated by the same man who had destroyed their childhood. By the time Amanda and John moved into Larry's camper, their world had completely collapsed. John's family had no idea. His mother was ill, and when he called to say they were going on a road trip, it was the last time she heard his voice. There was no trip, no vacation, just a descent into hell. Valentine's Day arrived, a day once meant for love. John, despite everything, still clung to his affection for Amanda. He tried to make the day special. He bought meat, drinks, and prepared a dinner he hoped would reignite the connection between them. At the table were Amanda, her sister, and her father. But this was no family celebration. It was the prelude to a nightmare. John's warm words to Amanda were met with agitation from Larry. Beneath the surface, something had shifted. Larry and Amanda had crossed a line that blurred morality, biology, and sanity. To them, John was now an obstacle. Larry interrupted the dinner with a chilling proposition. A game. John's legs were bound, and he was told to answer questions about his life. At first, it was harmless school memories, family stories, but then the questions took a dark turn. Larry, strung out and paranoid, accused him of being an undercover FBI agent. When John denied it, they began beating him. The violence escalated until John, battered and bleeding, tried to crawl away. He begged for mercy. He covered himself with photos of his children in a desperate attempt to remind them of his humanity. Larry shattered a wine bottle, ironically the one John had bought for dinner, over his head. But the nightmare didn't end there. John was tortured for 2 more days. During that time, drugs flowed freely. Sanity was gone. Finally, Amanda ended it. She placed a black bag over her husband's head and pulled it tight until he stopped breathing. His body was buried in the backyard. And then, unthinkably, the trio celebrated. Amanda and Larry announced their engagement. Father and daughter, now lovers, toasted with pills and alcohol. Their descent into madness was complete. By the 3rd day, reality had splintered. They saw hallucinations. John's ghost watching from the shadows, police sirens echoing in their heads, and the earth where they buried him moving, shifting, as if clawed from beneath. Their delusions spiraled. Paranoia gave way to psychosis, and still no one knew what had happened. Addiction is a parasite. It doesn't just infect the body, it hijacks the mind, the heart, the soul. In the case of Amanda and John, it was the weapon Larry used to break down every barrier of judgment or self-preservation they had left. And when all that remained was dependence, he seized complete control. What began as an awkward reunion between estranged family members turned into a nightmarish descent into moral collapse, guided by a manipulative monster. Larry's manipulation wasn't fueled by remorse or a longing for reconciliation. It was a calculated power play. By creating a toxic ecosystem of dependency, he pulled everyone into his orbit. Amanda's desire to reconnect with her sister was weaponized. John's love was weaponized. Even Anna Marie's vulnerabilities were used against her. It wasn't family, it was a cult of control. The most disturbing part of this case isn't just the murder. It's the slow, strategic breakdown of an entire family unit until nothing remained but chaos, delusion, and death. It's a case that forces us to ask, how much of a person's humanity can you destroy before they no longer recognize right from wrong? The answer lies buried in that backyard, under the Virginia soil, alongside a man who just wanted to celebrate Valentine's Day with his wife. It sounds unbelievable, like something pulled from the pages of a gruesome horror novel, but it happened. Days after murdering John McGuire, Larry McClure and his daughters returned to the grave, not to mourn, not to confess, but to make sure he stayed dead. Fueled by a potent mix of delusion, drugs, and paranoia, they dug up John's decomposing body. They checked his pulse, shined flashlights into his lifeless eyes, and even whispered his name, convinced he might rise from the dead and expose them. When that didn't calm their fears, they turned to mutilation. They took a wood axe and dismembered him, limb by limb. They buried his remains in separate spots around the property and drove wooden stakes into each piece, like he was some mythological monster that needed to be stopped from resurrecting. Then, in a final effort to erase him from existence, they poured lime over the shallow graves to accelerate decomposition. 3 weeks later, as if none of it had happened, Amanda and Larry were married. To avoid suspicion, Larry changed his name, severing the paper trail that tied them as father and daughter. The newlyweds packed up and moved to Kentucky, convinced they could leave behind their past and start over. They made a pact. No more illegal substances. In their rented house, they hung an American flag on the porch, blending in with neighbors hiding in plain sight. But far from forgetting John, his family had started asking questions. His ex-wife and parents noticed the silence. He wasn't returning calls. He had simply vanished. In 2019, his mother officially reported him missing. Meanwhile, Larry was making another mistake. He failed to notify the state of his relocation, something he was required to do under the terms of his parole. That violation sent him back to prison. There, without access to the substances that had numbed his mind, Larry began to unravel completely. Withdrawals shredded his already fractured mental state. The line between fantasy and reality disappeared. Obsessed with the idea that police were going to dig up his former property and uncover the body, Larry became frantic. He had to get a message out. He needed Amanda and Anna Marie to exhume the remains again and bury them somewhere else. But all prison calls are recorded, and he knew it. So he planned to use coded language, rehearsed his message. There was just one problem. He was denied phone privileges. Unable to bear the pressure, Larry finally cracked. He walked up to the on-duty officer and said he had a confession to make. He hoped that confessing to the murder before being formally charged might earn him leniency. Better yet, if he pinned everything on his daughters, maybe he could escape the death penalty altogether. At first, the police dismissed him. The claims were too bizarre. Dismembered body parts, a backyard grave, a twisted family triangle? It sounded like the ravings of a desperate junkie. Still, protocol required that any confession, no matter how outrageous, had to be investigated. What was meant to be a routine verification suddenly spiraled into something much bigger. When investigators arrived at the old property, they found traces of lime, exactly where Larry had said it would be. And then, one by one, his horrific claims began to check out. Law enforcement quickly apprehended Amanda and Anna Marie. Both were stunned, not just by their arrest, but by what Larry had done. He had turned on them completely. In his sworn statement, he claimed the sisters killed John and that he was nothing more than an unwilling witness. Each one began fighting for themselves. Gone was the deranged loyalty. Now it was every criminal for themselves, each trying to spin the story to look like an accident, a mistake, anything but what it was: premeditated, sadistic murder. For John's family, it was almost too much to bear. There was no body, not really, only fragments of what once was. They were forced to collect those remains from forensic examiners, transport them home, and bury them in a sealed casket. Friends helped, some offering money, others helping with the logistics. On October 25, 2019, John McGuire was buried at a Lutheran church. What remained of him, at least. But even that wasn't the end of the deception. On February 15th, just one day after Valentine's Day, the day John was murdered, someone logged into his Facebook account and posted a message. It said John was heading off on a trip and wouldn't be reachable for a while. "Don't worry about me," it read. It was a preemptive alibi, an attempt to delay any suspicion that he had disappeared. It meant one thing clearly. The MCCLURE family had planned his murder in advance. They knew what they were going to do, and they tried to cover it up. As if the murder and mutilation weren't enough, Larry and Amanda were charged with an additional offense: incestuous marriage. In the state of Kentucky, such a union is a crime. 6 months were added to their sentences. Then came the trial. Larry took the stand. "I've carried guilt over my daughters for most of my life," he said. "Yes, I committed a terrible crime when they were young. It put them in an orphanage. Their mother left. I was the only one who cared about them." This case reveals the terrifying ripple effect of generational trauma and unchecked mental illness. What began with a father's abusive crimes left 2 young girls abandoned and psychologically scarred. And when he returned, he didn't bring healing. He brought destruction. He re-entered their lives not as a parent seeking redemption, but as a manipulator bent on domination. John McGuire never stood a chance. He was a good man by all accounts, a loving father, a hopeful husband. His only crime was loving Amanda. And in this twisted nightmare, that was enough to get him killed. There's no justice that can undo what happened to him, but what remains is a grim cautionary tale. Monsters don't always live under beds. Sometimes they live in plain sight. They wear wedding rings. They raise flags. And sometimes they call themselves Dad. Larry McClure's confession may have shocked investigators, but it wasn't the voice of a remorseful man. It was a last-ditch effort to manipulate the system one final time. He didn't come clean to cleanse his soul. He did it to avoid the needle. Even in the courtroom, as he told the story of his broken past, there was no apology to John's family, no acknowledgement of the irreparable pain, just self-pity, performance, and the same grotesque justification that defined his entire life. A predator hiding behind a father's mask. I was grateful, truly grateful, to the people who took in my daughters when I couldn't. I won't lie to you. I even went to church. I prayed for those adoptive families. I believed they were giving my children the life I had stolen from them. But when I got out, something snapped in me. I was consumed by this idea of making up for the years I'd lost. That's probably why I acted the way I did. I won't pretend I couldn't have stopped it. I could have told Amanda to walk away from it all. I could have pulled her back from the edge. But I didn't. I admit that. And I understand. Maybe no one in this courtroom will ever truly grasp what went through my mind. But I ask you to understand, not excuse. You weren't in my shoes. John was a good man. I know that. If I could bring him back, I would. But I couldn't say no to Amanda. She was my youngest, my favorite. And she didn't love John. Not really. To her, he was a means to an end. A way to keep getting $180 in government aid. Have you ever considered killing a man over $180? No? Then maybe you'll understand the kind of person Amanda really is. She's not just broken. She's dangerous. A monster in disguise. I'll admit it, we were all addicts. We were slaves to that poison. And for that, we deserve punishment. No doubt about it. But I want to say something to the jury. No matter what sentence you hand down, I know I won't be here much longer. 10 years, maybe, if I'm lucky. And to John's family, to his children, I'm sorry. I truly am. He didn't deserve any of this. The trial dragged on for months. The three of us, Amanda, Anna Marie, and me, took turns pointing fingers, shifting blame, spinning stories. At one point, Amanda couldn't take the pressure anymore. She struck a deal with the prosecution. In exchange for her cooperation, they agreed to reduce her charge to involuntary manslaughter in the next round of hearings. But then I took the stand again. And this time I told a different version. I said we were all in it from the beginning. We bought the ingredients to cook meth, returned to my trailer, and started the process. That's when Amanda approached me. She said she wanted revenge. She claimed that, under the influence of drugs, John had raped Anna Marie, and that she was pregnant as a result. I didn't know what to believe, but I wanted my daughters to trust me again. I wanted to be part of their lives after so many years apart. So I didn't say no. That's on me. Every night I think about that. I think about what I did, what I didn't do. Sometimes I wonder if I should just end it, hang myself and be done with it. But then I think, why should I be the one to pay when it wasn't all my fault? When John's family was given the floor, it was a gut-wrenching moment. His mother couldn't even get the words out through her sobs. Her grief was too raw, too deep. Through tears, she whispered something the courtroom will never forget. Even if I could forgive the McClures, I will never forget what they did. And I pray I live to see the day one of them dies before I do. Then came John's children. Rage, pain, and sorrow poured from them like a tidal wave. They cursed us. They swore they'd never forgive. Their pain was absolute. The judge delivered the final verdict. Larry McClure, life in prison without the possibility of parole. When Amanda's sentence was read, her adoptive parents sat in the courtroom with tears in their eyes. They blamed themselves for telling Amanda that her biological father had come looking for her. They had always raised her with freedom of choice, encouraging her to make her own decisions. But never could they have imagined that this freedom would lead to such horror. Amanda, in turn, blamed it all on Larry. She claimed jealousy had eaten him alive, and that everything he did was driven by a possessive madness. Her adoptive parents begged the court to consider that, without Larry's influence, Amanda would never have turned to violence. But the prosecution saw it differently. They said it was all a conspiracy, that Amanda and Larry were in it together. Not just in crime, but in love. They believed the murder was carefully planned, a way to clear the path for their grotesque relationship. Amanda received 40 years. The judge noted that, with good behavior, she could be out in 20. When it was Anna-Marie's turn, she tried to separate herself from the crime. She claimed she never wanted John dead, that she was coerced, that she lived in fear of her father and sister. She said she only attended their wedding because she feared for her life. But the court didn't buy it. Anna-Marie was sentenced to 40 years in prison. This case isn't just about murder. It's about manipulation, about addiction, about how far broken people can fall when no one's watching. It's a story that forces us to confront the darkest parts of human nature. Loyalty turned to obsession, love warped into something monstrous, and the devastating consequences that follow. What began as a twisted reunion became a murder conspiracy drenched in drugs, delusion, and generational trauma. A father who should have protected his daughters. A daughter who should have loved her husband. A sister who stood by in silence. And a good man, John McGuire, caught in the center of it all, destroyed by those he trusted most.